Let's assemble a panel for Political Pulse this week. We have with us a panel of strategists, Marcel Weeder for the Liberals, Zoe Knowles for the Conservatives, and Tom Parkin for the NDP. Good evening, and thank you for joining us on Political Pulse this week.
Thank you, Akshay.
So gun control has become a big political talking point after the Prime Minister has banned over 1,500 military-style guns through an order in council and not via legislation. Now, in the wake of the tragedy in Nova Scotia, where we lost 22 lives in the worst massacre in Canadian history, opposition says the Prime Minister is using the pandemic and the incident to push Liberals' agenda. Critics are saying that banning guns is not the answer. Let's find out. Zoe, I'll start with you tonight. There was much pressure on the government to act where guns were concerned. Now they have, but banning of the guns is not a step in the right direction, the Conservatives are saying. Why do you think so?
Well, what Canadians really need to see is government cracking down on illegal guns, and especially gun smuggling, the vast majority of which comes from the United States. In Toronto, 75% of illegal guns come from the United States, and the vast majority of guns used in crime are illegal guns. What Canadians need is a Canada Border Services Agency task force that is dedicated to gun smuggling in coordination with American authorities, which Conservatives have been advocating for years. Without tougher border security and without cracking down on illegal guns and gun smuggling, government will never be able to address what is at the root of gun violence.
So what's your take on thousands of these military-style weapons actually being out there, Zoe?
Well, frankly, a lot of the guns that are currently out there are legal guns. And what we need to be cracking down on are the unlicensed guns. For example, the guns that the Nova Scotia shooter used were unlicensed. He shouldn't have been in possession of them whatsoever. And, you know, I hate to say this, but what the current bill is doing is banning guns that were already illegal in Canada.
Okay, let me bring in Tom on this one. Tom, is this a political move then? I mean, we know this was a part of the Liberal campaign. The Prime Minister said that legislation was ready, but the Parliament had to be stalled due to COVID-19. Tom?
Well, it's a curious announcement because after a long promise and a lot of delay in doing this, the announcement was strangely unclear on Friday. You know, the idea that we ban assault rifles means that there are no more assault rifles. But it seems that people may not be able to continue to buy assault weapons, but they will be able to continue to own the ones that they already have. So all the guns, all the assault weapons that are out there, the AR-15s and others in people's hands, it seems will continue to be in circulation. So the Prime Minister is calling it a ban, but a ban means a ban on sales and a mandatory buyback of all the other weapons that are now illegal.
But there is an amnesty period also. I mean, there is an amnesty period too, Tom, which we're talking about. The Prime Minister has said there is a buyback program, which of course is costing approximately $600 million, if I'm not wrong. What do you have to say about that?
Is it mandatory? Because if it's not mandatory, it's not a gun ban. So these are the kind of questions I think the Prime Minister needs to be asked. Okay. And I'm very sure that the New Democrats will be asking them whether this is a partial ban or really a ban.
Okay. Marcel, your take on what the critics are saying. Unclear messaging coming from the government.
Well, Akshay, I think this is a very good first step, and I think you're going to see more announcements as we progress down this road. This is a first step in, first of all, defining what type of weapons are going to be restricted in Canada, and then I believe that you'll hear from the government issuing a task force, as Zoe suggested, or trying to crack down on illegal. The first thing you need to do is define what is illegal and what isn't. Now we have that definition. Now and I know Minister Blair, as police chief in Toronto, was very passionate about trying to get illegal guns off the streets of Toronto. He has the experience, and I'm sure that in the days and the weeks ahead...
But Marcel, that's the point, that illegal guns will continue with the ban because, of course, they're illegal. They were illegal before the ban. They'll be illegal after the ban. How do you curb on that illegality is the question, Marcel.
The point is that we have to start somewhere. And so we're starting with the definition of what is illegal gun and trying to get those out of circulation voluntarily with an amnesty program and a buyback program, and then to crack down on illegal handguns that are smuggled in from outside of Canada. And
Well,
I should
that's
also
where we
point
need to
out,
see some
Akshay,
movement.
that there's one other point that people kind of missed, and that is the people with issues that commit suicide are using, for the most part, legal guns. And so, trying to get those guns out of people's hands.
But Marcel, sorry for interrupting you there. If we bring in that element, which I don't want to, that can also happen with guns which are legal, like a handgun. Nothing was said about the handgun. You can commit a suicide by a handgun as well.
And that's something I think that the government's going to be addressing as well. This is just, again, a first step in a long process. And I'll remind you that in Australia, when they had their tragedy, they enacted gun bans as well.
Okay.
And we saw what happened in New Zealand, and they issued a gun ban as well. So
and they did it promptly.
Everyone starts at some point, and this is the Canadian point.
Okay, but let's just hope that, of course, this will prevent more crime on the ground. We'll have to see how this really plays out. But let's shift our focus to the other big story we are tracking, opening of the economy, opening of the country. Several provinces have their plans ready, and May 4th seems to be a decisive day in restrictions being lifted in Quebec, Ontario, Saskatchewan, Manitoba. This after the federal government has rolled out billions and billions of dollars to keep the economy afloat, which has entered a recession according to the CD Howe, and Canada's budget deficit growing to $252 billion in 2020-2021, according to Parliamentary Budget Officer. Marcel, my question to you is, while we're trying to help everybody right now in this crisis, do you think the government has a plan? What should be the strategy to come out of this big, massive hole now?
Well, as far as the strategy is concerned, I look forward to hearing what the new Bank of Canada governor is going to be talking about shortly. As you know, there's been a replacement for Polos, and so waiting to hear from that. And also Finance Minister Morneau. So, the plans, a lot of provinces are enacting, opening up their province, but from a federal point of view, I think it's too early to say what a national strategy is going to be. I think there's going to be a lot more coordination that's necessary between the provinces in terms of how we approach it. I know that the Prime Minister has talked to his provincial counterparts, and that there needs to be a national approach on things.
Something that we've been speaking of since the very beginning, but the government has been avoiding. Zoe, is it too early to talk about that plan? How will we come out of all of this?
Well, I think increasingly we're going to be turning to the premiers and the provincial health authorities as different provinces reopen at different rates. And I think the role that the federal government will play is in setting up a plan for how we're going to be eventually rolling back the CERB. I think what we need to come out with is a means-tested CERB with declining benefits so that families can securely go back to work without worrying that they're going to be losing the full $2,000 a month if they make $1,001 a month in income. And that's the role that I think the federal government will play.
Okay, Tom, what's your take on the question we're putting out, and how do we come out of this? And secondly, I also want to understand from you, we have provinces opening up, Tom. We know that. But is this happening in haste? Because Quebec today reported over 1,000 cases. Ontario reported hundreds of cases. And we're looking at these two provinces also opening up partially with restrictions on Monday.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think everybody would say, we want to go back to work as safely as possible, as soon as it is safe to do so. So I think we have to, at this point, acknowledge that there have been some mistakes, and we have to learn from them. In Alberta, we have 2 meatpacking plants where, when there were 38 cases of COVID in one of them, the union was, workers were, freaking out, and the union was calling for a shutdown and cleanup of the workplace. The government of Alberta, Mr. Kenny, did not do that. There are now 1,000 people sick and 2 people dead. This was totally preventable, and the government didn't do the right things. In Ontario, in long-term care facilities, there were healthcare directives and occupational health and safety laws ignored by certain private long-term care owners. People got sick, hundreds died, and then the government didn't enforce the laws. Workers, actually, their unions had to go to the court and to go to labor board to get injunctions and orders just for these employers to comply with the law.
Right.
So when we talk about returning to work, we all want to get back to work. We want to get back to creating wealth in our society and doing all that terrific stuff. But, it's got to be safe. And we got to know that our premiers actually have the courage to set rules and enforce rules and that workers, when they go back, can feel confident that their voice will be listened to if there's concern.
Yep.
Finally, the Prime Minister does have a role because he is the leader of the national plan.
Yeah.
And he has to assure, he has to be assured himself.
That's right. So while the countries, of course, people are looking at the provincial leaders, they're also looking at the federal government, how we will come out of this with a solid plan. I'll have to leave it at that. Appreciate you all joining me. Marcel Wieder, Zoe Knowles, and Tom Parkin. Always great to talk to you. Thank you very much.
Thanks.
Stay safe and stay healthy.
Thank you.